It's bread baking day, so I figured I would take you along and show you everything that I baked today. So let's jump right into it and get started. Now today I'm trying out a few different recipes. So the plan is to make 2 of my standard seeded sourdough rye breads, which I make all the time. It's kind of just like a standard recipe at this point. Then I'm also going to be trying a blueberry cinnamon bread, and I'm also going to be attempting some baguettes. So we'll see how everything turns out, but let's just get started. I'm going to start by dividing up my active sourdough starter that I fed last night. So at this point it's not at its peak anymore, but I think it's still good enough to bake with. For reference, I'm going to use my biggest bowl for my double batch of my seeded sourdough rye bread. The red bowl is going to be for the baguettes, and then the blue bowl is going to be for our blueberry loaf. Now hopefully I remember that throughout and I don't mix it up. Now per loaf, I'm using 100 grams of my active sourdough starter, and to this I'm going to add 350 grams of water, and to my double batch I'm going to add 700 grams of water, and that's going to just give me about a 70% hydration level. Now again, feel free to add more water if you want to bump up the hydration. It will just make it a little bit harder to handle, and especially shaping is going to be a little bit more difficult. So I'm going to leave it at that amount of water for now. Now I always add a little bit of sweetener to my bread as well. So I always add about a tablespoon of sugar beet syrup, but you can also add honey or agave, or you can just add a tablespoon of sugar as well. This stuff is very sticky and messy. Now the sugar beet syrup gives it this really nice brown color, and it also just makes the bread smell really, really good. Now to this I'm going to add my flour. So for my blueberry loaf, I'm just using 500 grams of whole wheat flour. For my baguettes, I'm also going to use 500 grams of whole wheat flour. And for my double batch of my seeded rye dough, I'm using 700 grams of whole wheat flour, 300 grams of rye flour. But I have adjusted that in the past as well, so feel free to add more or less. Now at this point you can also go ahead and add any seeds or other spices that you want. So to my blueberry one, I'm adding about a tablespoon of cinnamon, and to my seeded sourdough rye bread, I'm going to add, I don't even know what seeds yet, so I'll just let you know what I add while I add them. 20 grams of chia seeds, 30 grams of flax seeds, and 40 grams of sunflower seeds. I don't know if a tablespoon is too much. 500 grams of flour, 1 tablespoon. Okay, we'll just do it. I will report back and tell you if it's too cinnamony or if there needs to be more cinnamon. Now I'm just gonna roughly mix this up with my spatula just to kind of get the flour incorporated. And then we're just gonna let it sit for about maybe half an hour or 45 minutes or so before we add our salt. So for now, I'm just gonna cover these with a wet towel, and I'm gonna let them sit for like 45 minutes, and then we can add the salt and start our stretch and folds. Okay, we're back. It's been about 45 minutes. So at this point, we're gonna go ahead and add 10 grams of salt per loaf. So 10 grams, and 20 grams of salt. Now all we need to do is mix in the salt. I find it's easiest to do that with a hand mixer. That way everything gets kind of kneaded together and it also incorporates all of the flour as well. So I'm gonna do that with a hand mixer. Again, feel free to do this by hand or with a spatula as well. Now that everything is mixed in, we can go ahead and start our stretch and folds. So for the next 2 hours, we're going to do 4 sets of stretch and folds that are each 30 minutes apart. Now we just finished our 4th and final stretch and fold, and as you can tell, the doughs that are using just the whole wheat flour are a lot easier to stretch versus the one with the rye flour is a lot more tough because the rye flour absorbs a lot more of the water, so it's not quite as elastic, which is totally okay. So we're going to cover these again, and we're going to let them rise for another 2 to 2.5 hours. You basically just want them to just about double in size. It's currently 3 o'clock, so it's been just about 2.5 hours, and the doughs have definitely doubled in size. So at this point, I'm going to quickly pre-shape them and then let them sit for another 15 minutes or so before I do their final shaping. Which one do I do first? Now I'm gonna shape all of my breads the same way, except that the blueberry cinnamon loaf is obviously going to get our blueberries in it. So this is about 100 grams of blueberries. Feel free to use more or less. I don't wanna add too many because I don't want them to jump out of the bread. And I also don't wanna add too much extra moisture, so I feel like 100 grams is good, maybe even too much, but we'll see how much we can actually get into the bread. Everything is shaped, so I'm gonna cover it again with a wet towel. I'm gonna let it proof for another 2 hours or so just out on the counter. And I think that should be long enough for them to rise a little bit more and get a little bit more fluffy, and then they can go into the oven. Now, since it's bread baking day, I figured I would also share what I'm going to make for dinner today. Now, while our bread was doing its bulk fermentation, I made a really quick pizza dough that I already separated onto 2 trays. And I'm going to top that with a spinach sour cream mixture, as well as some onions and ham pieces that I cooked down with some soy sauce, agave, rosemary, salt, and pepper. So I'm just gonna quickly top my pizzas, and that way we can eat while the rest of our loaves are baking. It needs cheese. just a little bit. I'm gonna bake these at 420 degrees Fahrenheit for maybe like 15 or 20 minutes. And as soon as these are done, we can start baking off all of our loaves of bread and our baguettes. And hopefully they turn out. It's 7:30 and everything is finally baked off. So that's gonna be everything for my bread baking day. I'm gonna let this cool off overnight, and then tomorrow morning I'm gonna end up freezing probably most of this. If you wanna see another vlog type video like this where I take you along on my big bread baking days, let me know and I'll be sure to film those. And if you wanna see a separate video on how I made these baguettes, let me know as well.